Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 99, and today we're going to be talking about drafting in Lost Cavern of Ixalan, but specifically about what does drafting the right way mean, at least according to the data. But before we move into that, I would like to thank all my patrons. I have a new patron this time, so thank you, Brian Damien, for joining the team. I would like to thank my sponsor, mtgazone.com. I started writing articles, and this part is going to be definitely written down as an article on how to diagnose your weaknesses and strengths as a drafter using some rudimentary data. With that out of the way, we can move to our preamble. And today's preamble is going to be linked to the main topic, and it's about data analysis. And that, some of the data analysis is relatively straightforward. If I'm talking about win rates, I'm talking about which cards are good in a particular deck. I go to 17 lands, I fish this data out, and I can talk about it for hours, as you probably will know. But some analyses are complicated and they take time. And especially the ones where you don't have an idea what you're doing will take time. So the idea for today's seminar, I had it first maybe 2 years ago. And I had no idea what to do with it. I knew that there is something in it, and I had no idea what to do with it whatsoever. Then, roughly 8 months ago, I had the same idea. I knew that I had it before, but I just it returned to me all of a sudden when I was looking through 17 Lens data. And I planned even like a guest episode when I could invite 2 guests and basically try to talk with them to figure out what's going on with this idea that I had. But of course, I didn't follow up with that. It was hard. People that were involved were not content creators. It was difficult to organize. Didn't work. And I didn't forget my idea. I was just continuously looking for inspiration on finding that, like one moment when something will click to me. And actually it did during the stream, during the running of the seminar. This idea clicked to me midway of a sentence. You can hear maybe a slight pause when I actually come up with that. I didn't run out on the streets of Syracuse naked, screaming Eureka. I was just continuing with my stream, but the idea was firmly there at that particular moment. And since then, I was working on it because I thought it would be a perfect thing to do when the format quiets down a bit and when I can analyze some extra data and think about it more and materialize the whole content around it. But it is something for if you are planning to do anything on data in Magic, which I highly encourage, of course, that some of the ideas that you're going to have, the good ones especially, and the ones that are the more universal ones, are not going to be routine. These are things that happen, once or twice a year, that you have a really let you be the judge of that if it's a good idea or not, but if it's really something that is worth dedicating additional effort to. And I did a couple of analyses that I was quite proud of. Some of them probably no one knows about. I'm still proud of them. I think that they added something, especially things linking, like we're going to see later today, linking ALSA and wheeling, and how you can basically very simply extract the wheeling data from 17 lands by looking at ALSA. That's something I'm quite proud of. Some things around signal sending and the impact of those signals, I'm quite proud of that. But all those analyses, they took time. And in some cases, I ran them maybe 4 or 5 times before I was actually happy with the end result. So just to, give you the idea of what it takes to analyze data that is linked to Magic. Sometimes you can't just run it on fast burner and spew out good ideas every day, and you have to accept that fact and just live with it. Right. With that out of the way, we can move to the first topic of the seminar, and that's going to be the draft data. It's been released in the public data sets. I'm waiting now every single time for the public data sets to be released. I decided it's not a fair advantage if I ask 17 Lens to give me the data earlier. And also, it doesn't put them in the awkward situation when they will have to decide whether to give me the data early or treat me like everyone else, which I think they should do. So I'm just waiting patiently for the data to be released before I start with the analysis. But luckily, the draft data is out, so I can look at some of the findings and show them to you today. We're going to look how picks will impact win rates, it's important to know which cards to force. So I'm going to look a bit about what are the most important first picks, and which cards are not worth first picking, also important to know, and which cards you can reliably wheel. That's going to be probably the bigger focus of the seminar. Honestly, the data from draft this time around, I tried some new things and they completely didn't work. One idea I had, and this is another thing that you have from working with data, one idea I had was looking at win rate of a card depending on when it was picked in the first pack. And there are some cards that actually show some signal, but I just was not convinced that that signal is not some kind of noise and it's real. So I decided to scrap that whole segment, and that's where we are. But luckily, I also have the second part of the seminar when we can work out my hypothesis and then maybe learn something around that. So first things, in every format, I try to look at the cards that go very differently in pack 3 and in pack 1, and look at their alpha. So here we have a graph with cards that go much later in pack 3, and that's why it's called rewards in pack 3. And in every single format, when I look at those cards that go late in pack 3, we see the same trend, and it's not different here. Captain Storm, Nikanzil, Deep Fathom Echo, Zoyova Lavatong, Molten Collapse, Kutsil, Akawali, Kaparokti, Isquint, Abuelo, all of those are multicolor cards. So multicolor cards just go naturally later in pack 3. This is something that we observed in every single set so far. It's still worth to hammer the message on. Multicolor cards are a good way of getting your early identity. So you want to pick them, and I actually tested that with this data set. You probably want to pick them depending on the strength, but like pick 3, 4, 5 to give your deck some sort of identity and get some kind of indication that the color pair might be open. But of course, late, especially with cards like Captain Storm, that it really should only go into blue-red decks. You don't want to pick it when you're not in the blue-red already. So that card will just go much later in the later packs, because if you're not sitting next to someone who's drafting Izzet, you're probably going to get it past. So quite obvious one. Two cards actually that are monocolored in here. Poetic Ingenuity. That's the enchantment that whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, you make a 3/1 dino, and whenever a dino attacks, you get a treasure. It's a payoff for artifacts. It's very similar to Captain Storm in what it wants to do. So obviously, it will have the same kind of limitations as Captain Storm has. And the second one is Queen Base Paladin. That's the 5 mana 5/4. When it ETBs or attacks, you can reanimate a vampire from your graveyard, and you lose life equal to its casting cost. Again, this is the kind of a card that, even though it's monocolored, you really want to have it in a deck that already has multiple vampires, which realistically is going to be white-black, and probably that's why it goes later, because people just won't put it as a vanilla 5/4. Rosemary T, thank you very much for the raid, by the way. I did notice that there was a bump of people in the chat. Then there are cards that go later in the that go earlier in pack 3. So you can get them in pack 1, but in pack 3 they become rarer. And normally this was fixing, but we don't have that great of a fixing in this set. And yet still we have the same trend that lands are going earlier in pack 3. This is the moment when people realize, look, I have enough playables. I can actually pick a couple of those caves for my deck to have something to do with my mana later in the game. And we have some of the fixing ones. We have the Captivating Cave, Echoing Deeps, Volatile Vault, Promising Vein. These can somewhat fix you one way or another. We also have those monocolor caves: Hidden Courtyard, Hidden Volcano, Hidden Cataract, Hidden Necropolis, Hidden Nursery. All of them, they go slightly a pick earlier in pack 3. And we also have the signal of something that we've seen in the last set, rare drafting. We see Fabrication Foundry going earlier in pack 3, Hit the Motherlode going earlier in pack 3. These cards are just not good, but they are still 20 gems, or in case of Millennium Calendar, 40 gems. So if you see them later in the draft, you can actually pick them and get some get some gems from them, and that's what probably people do. On top of that, we have cards that are not playable but are uncommons that might go slightly earlier but still quite late, like Sorcerer's Spyglass and Contested Game Ball. Again, under the assumption that the deck is almost done, I don't have a good pick, there's nothing I will put in my deck while I'm drafting, I might as well take an uncommon and get some vault progress or something. And actually, you can see that quite well in the data, and especially until Hidden Nursery, because then you sort of see a drop off that might be a bit of noise in that data. But yeah, there we go. Now, this is another analysis I did last time, but last time I did it only using commons, and I actually wanted to see that using the all kind of rarities. And this is basically linking the probability of playing a card in your deck, which is at this axis here. So 100% you always put it in the deck, 0% you never put it in your deck. And then ALSA of the card. And you can see that there are basically two lines in here. So there is this one line, this is commons and uncommons. And there's this line, rares. And this is an interesting observation that these things are basically two separate curves with slightly different parameters. What it means is that rares will cost you when you pick them. It's not like straightforward that you pick a rare even if you pick it later, because if you pick a rare later, the probability of you putting it in your deck is actually slightly lower compared to the card of a different rarity that you would pick at the same spot. So say you pick a rare at that has ALSA 4, you will have roughly 30% of putting it in your deck. The same probability, you will have a common with 80% of chance of being put in your deck. So if you pick them at the same spot, clearly you're getting a better bargain for your deck by picking an uncommon and common of the similar kind of ALSA. But of course, rare is gems and potential, constructed material for you. So I guess that's what people pick, those kind of cards. But even if you pick like a playable rare, like these ones will be that most definitely playable rares. I'm not looking at win rate here, but they will probably have like 56 to 60% win rate. You still only have like 70% of playing them in your deck, while you're almost guaranteed like 80-90% probability of playing those cards in your deck when they are common and uncommon at the same kind of things. Which means that we go out of our way to pick some rares, maybe to speculate on them, but we are not necessarily playing them. And this is something that we should maybe start thinking a bit more about. Here, I guess that this is the signal of the super powerful uncommons that have low ALSA and will be almost always played in the decks when they are picked. Again, similar ALSA rares will only go into your deck around 50-60% of the time. So yeah, big difference in what you're getting for your deck when you pick a rare. And I actually don't have a good mechanism why that happens. So it might be that those rares that you pick early are going to be from pick one and they are more speculative, because I don't believe that people stick more to the uncommons that they pick, and they put them always in their deck when the rares they abandon quite easily. So there must be something in there. And I probably should redo this analysis now. I'm thinking aloud. I probably should redo this analysis for pack 1 only and for pack 3 only, and see if there is a convergence or divergence of those curves, and in which direction does it work. But still quite an interesting piece. There is a nice cluster of cards here also that are played around 80% of the time when they are picked and have a relatively high ALSA of 6. So we would expect those cards to be played roughly 50%, but they're played around 80%. These are all caves. Again, if you pick lands, there will probably be a higher chance of you putting them in your deck, because if you pick the lands, you probably already have an idea what you're going to be playing, and therefore they will more frequently end up in your deck. That's just some mechanism. And it probably would be worth looking at some of the cards at the lower and higher ends of those curves just to see what they are. I think that the only interesting one is this one. It has ALSA of 2.3, which is reserved to like super powerful cards only, but it only is played 37% of the time in decks. Why? This is Cavern of Souls. people pick it for constructed. And you can see that actually in the data that Caverns of Souls is slightly outlier in terms of how early people pick it compared to how frequently they play it in their decks. So people don't want to spend 4 mythic wildcards to craft them. They'd rather draft them. Okay. Now let's look at the highest win rate first picks. And there's a good selection of those. But there are 3 of them that are really weirdly high, and two of them are very unexpected, I would even say. The highest first pick in the format is Unstable Glyph Bridge. It's a pretty strong bomb, a Wrath that brings a body with it and is somewhat selective, so you can make sure that this is disproportional already in the first instance. And that has 64% win rate when it's first picked. But 2 other cards that have an extremely high win rate are Inverted Iceberg, the 2-mana blue common that flips into a 6/6, and Goblin Tomb Raider. 63.4 and 63.3% win rate when in the decks when those cards were first picked and put in the deck. And then you got number 4, Oaken Siren at 61.1. And this for me is a very strong signal of people forcing the Izzet artifact decks in the early days. I'm pretty sure there were some really strong players in 17 lands that were so stuck on forcing the Izzet deck that they could actually produce enough data to impact it. Because first of all, only someone that wants to force an artifact deck will first pick a Tomb Raider or Inverted Iceberg. There is few packs, if you would be drafting the hard way, where you would, when Inverted Iceberg or Tomb Raider would be the strongest card in the pack. However, there was I only looked at the data with at least 100 games of a sample size, which is not amazingly huge, but it's something. Hello, Mr. Kitty Cat. What do you want from me? Yes. You think I'm talking to you, but I'm not. Now, please move to your place. You've had food, you've had scratches, and I'm not buying any of it. This is the kind of conditions I have to work in. And Oaken Siren is a sort of confirmation of that. This is another probably signal of people trying to really force Izzet artifact decks. So yeah, I think that because no one who is drafting the hard way will first pick those cards, and only people who force them will first pick them, and they have such a high win rate when they were first picked, it shows to me that forcing Izzet, at least in large chunk of the draft, was extremely successful a strategy in the first couple of weeks. I don't know if it still works, but can you imagine it has a higher win rate than first picking Bonehorde Dracosaur, which obviously is a better card. Another card that we have there is Chartercourse, which would fit into one of those aggressive blue decks. Apart from that, what we have is Kitesail Larcenist, Breaches Eager Pillager, Careening Minecart, which is quite surprising because the card doesn't have that high of a win rate on its own. Again, probably the signal from the first days when it was extremely successful, because you could just get such busted Izzet cards that even the Careening Minecart was carried by them. And then we have Diamond Pickaxe, same kind of situation. Zoetic Glyph, this one should be first picked, but still probably a signal of people forcing this kind of deck. Vanguard of the Rose and Warden of the Inner Sky, which is quite surprising because neither Warden of the Inner Sky maybe is not a surprise, but Vanguard of the Rose is quite surprising as this card is not particularly powerful. But still, I guess it was only first picked by people who had a plan for it, and they executed this plan. And then we have like an actual bombs in Sanguine Evangelist and a Geological Appraiser, which is another good card that you can just put in any kind of Izzet Boros deck. So these were the ones that were really the strongest first picks. And just to take a look at it, I will need to find something. Goblin Tomb Raider, was it? Goblin Tomb Raider. The win rate of Goblin Tomb Raider when it was picked later in the pack drops significantly. So, already when it was second picked, third pick, the win rate goes down to like 57%. And Inverted Iceberg, same thing. It was having a 63% win rate as a first pick, but only like 56, 57% when it was picked later in the pack. And when I looked at the win rates later in the pack, I'm not going to make any graphs of that because that was too much selective, but I can actually mention it. One card that sprang out on me, and I'm panically looking for it because I forgot obviously its name. A Kinjali Dawn Runner. That was a card that had pretty low win rate when it was picked in the first 3 picks. It had around 55, 54% win rate when it was picked then. But if it was picked later, it actually had a high win rate of around 57, 60% even, and picks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So this is the kind of a card that you don't want to first pick. You don't want to maybe force around it. But if you see it later, it actually is sort of a signal that white is open if you see it past pick 4. And probably this is the good kind of indicator card for what you want to be drafting if you see it later. Okay. Now in terms of the low win rate picks, worst card to pick is Mischievous Pup. That card was pretty much hyped in the preview season, including by me. I thought it was going to be much better, but it turns out that there's just not enough creatures that are worth saving from it. And you definitely don't want to be, keeping 3 mana open and not doing anything with it. So that only had like 44% win rate. But then we have a whole collection of a category of cards. We have Akawali, the Seething Tower. That's the Golgari Signpost uncommon. We have Amalia Benavides Aguirre. That's the Orzhov rare. That whenever you gain life, you explore, and in constructed, it can become 20/20 and explode the whole table. Deeproot Pilgrimage. That's the thing. Whenever you tap a Merfolk, you make a Merfolk. Gisha Sun's Avatar, the Naya-colored dinosaur. And then you have Grasping Shadow, Soulful Viper. These are 2 black cards, but they are not, I think, in the same category. But you have the Myco Tyrant, which is a Golgari mythic that makes some funguses and grows bigger as they get created. Matzalantli, the Great Door. That's a sort of Ramaging artifact, and Abuelo's Awakening, and that's a reanimation for in white. And all those cards, apart from the Soulful Viper and the Grasping Shadows, I think have one thing in common, and that's these are sort of lower graded build-arounds in this format. And the thing with those is that common knowledge is if you have those kind of weird, rare build-arounds, first pick them and build around them, and you'll get somewhere. But it seems like in this format, it was not the case with those cards, at least. They seem to have a very low win rate when they were first picked and built around. And actually, I think that this is a particular thing for LCI, that those build-arounds come together so rarely that you picked it, you tried to build it, and often ended up with a mess of a deck. But there is another thing in here. It's frequently that it's lower win rate players that will fall into the traps of those B-graded build-arounds. Top players, they are focused on winning. And because they are focused on winning, they will rather pick a good white common over those risky kind of build-arounds. So part of that low win rate of those cards is because they are being played by lower win rate players, and that sort of drops the power of them. I mean, Soulful Viper might count as one of those cards because it's sort of probably people try to build around the Reanimator when they first pick this card. And also, interestingly, Join the Dead, quite a low win rate first pick. Another card that disappoints, mainly because giving -5/-5 to a 1/1 flyer for 1 mana is not a great deal. And this is a thing that you had to do quite a lot with this card in this format. So you might want to play it in your deck. You might even want to have 2 or 3 of those. You just don't want to waste your first pick to pick them. You might only go into black when you see that black is open and you see those pick 5 or pick 6 or something like that. And again, I can go to the data that I'm not showing you, but the win rate of join the dead increases the later you pick it. So if you picked it in your pick 8, the decks that pick join the dead as a pick 8 in the first pack already have a 57% win rate, so much better. This is the card that you want to be picking a bit later. Now I'm lost. Oh, now I'm found again. Not completely. There we go. Now I found myself. Okay. So there is also, as always, a concern about wheeling in the format. And every format, I do the same curve just to show that the curve still works. This is the ALSA to probability of wheeling a card when you open it, pack 1, pick 1. And this is ALSA for the pack 1 only specific. And you get this beautiful curve, sort of sigmoid in its shape. This time we had basic lands in the pack. And because we have basic lands in the pack, we get this card that has a very, very high ALSA of 11, because they will almost always be picked as the last pick. So you will almost always see them very late. But yeah, it shows you that the curve continues as you would expect in a sigmoidal shape. And by sigmoidal, it starts flat, then it starts going steep, and then it starts shallowing out, and then it goes back to flat. That's the sigmoidal shape of a curve, if you need to know it. But because this curve is so predictable across the formats, it means that with some format specifics taken into account, like for example, in this set, we have additional card in the pack, which might, at least in some cases, influence the pick order, because some of those cards will be playable. That will be the case. But taking all those things into account, you can still sort of quite well estimate from ALSA of the card how often it will wheel. So for example, a card of ALSA with ALSA of 4, it will wheel roughly like 13% of the time. If ALSA is 6, it will wheel roughly 45% of the time. If ALSA is 7, it will wheel roughly 65% of the time. And you can basically access that. Well, you can, when I'm going to put this thing on YouTube, you can just look through that curve. Or if you're my patron and you have access to the slides, you can just go to the slides and just find your stuff quite easily on that curve. And estimate the probability of a card wheeling. And then based on the probability of winning, you can adjust your strategy of drafting, because I think that this is one of the superpower skills that you have as a drafter. Knowing how likely it is that something wheels, it allows you to plan the draft in such a way that you open a pack, you pick something, and you give yourself a good chance of picking a second card from the same pack with predicted frequency. And this will be useful if you have an even powered card, a pack, so there's nothing like outstanding, and you have maybe 4 different cards that you can select from, and one of them comes with another card that might wheel quite frequently, and this is the card that you probably want to try wheeling. If it wheels, you're a winner, because you know that you got the card that you wanted. If it doesn't wheel, you got a very important information, because you know that the particular card that you were planning to wheel and you knew that it's got a good chance of wheeling did not wheel. So there must be someone, at least in the pod, that might be interested in the similar plan as you were while you were doing your pick 1. Of course, that plan might have changed since then, but at least that information stays and you know what happened there. So I put 4 different categories of cards that can be wheeled with some frequency, and based on how likely or unlikely it is to happen, they are in different categories. The first one is the long shot wheel targets, and I picked arbitrarily out of multiple cards that are in the range of wheeling around 10% of the time. I picked 3 that I think are interesting. One is Master Guide's Mural. This is the kind of a card that you probably want to try wheeling. You might want to pick something better, like a 1/1 flyer or something aggressive or defensive in white, and hope that this wheels. If it wheels, you got a benefit. It will happen once out of every 10 times that you try it, but it's worth it because you probably don't want to go first pick Master Guide Mural. You probably want to pick something better. It's nice to know that 10% of the time it's going to wheel. The other card, Zoetic Glyph, you should probably always pick it. It's always going to be the best card in the pack, but it still wheels 10% of the time. And while you probably will never use that ability because you will pick the glyph, or you should pick the glyph, and I encourage you to pick the glyph on your pick one, pack one, you might see, 15 to 20% of the time a glyph still there at pick 8. And hopefully that number is going down as we speak. But people just didn't get convinced by the glyph so far. So you might still expect to see it a bit later than the card should be. Because honestly, you should never be seeing it wheeling ever. I can't believe that there is no blue drafter on the pod. And the card that is probably the most important of those is Poison Dart Frog. This card is particularly important when you're drafting dinos. But of course, to start drafting dinos, you need to start drafting dinos. You probably don't want to first pick the Poison Dart Frog without any dinos in your pool. So this is a great feeler for you. If you open a pack with Isquint or some of the rare dinosaurs that are pretty good, or even the Belligerent Yearling, the 2-mana 3/2 uncommon, you might pick this and send the Poison Dart Frog on a trip around the table. If it comes back, this is probably your signal that yes, you should be able to get your dinosaur deck because green is sufficiently open for the frog to wheel. And if there are other green cards in the pack, I don't know, there is the Huatli's Final Strike, for example. Maybe that was picked, but that's good for you because frog is much more important for your dinosaur dog than the Huatli's Final Strike. Because your problem is ramping, and later that frog very often converts as a kill spell for a flyer of the opponent, and flyer is your weak spot. Flyers is your weak spot when you're playing dinosaurs. So yeah, a really neat target for wheeling in the Poison Dart Frog. Then we have the gamble wheel targets. And these are the cards that wheel around 30% of the time. So you are not guaranteed that they are going to wheel, but you have like a decent chance. So maybe sometimes you want to pick something weaker. Let's say you open a pack and there is a Miner's Guide Wing, which in my opinion is a better card of the two, and the 4-mana 3/2 that makes a 1/1 flyer. This flyer, the 3/2 flyer, is picked much more higher than the Guide Wing. So picking the Alltech Cloud Guard, the 3/2, is a good idea because you have 33% odds of wheeling the Miner's Guide Wing. And you probably have like 5% chance of, I can actually check it. Just give me a second. I have all the numbers somewhere. What is the wheeling probability of the Alltech? Oh, of course I typoed. Alltech Cloud Guard, no, it's still 12%, but much lower chance. It's at the same kind of level as the Poison Dart Frog. You have a better chance of wheeling the Guide Wing, so you might as well pick the 3/2 and send the Guide Wing on a trip around the table. And if it comes back, you know that white is open, at least in some way. One way it can be that it's actually quite open, and the other way it can be that it's not that open, but people are drafting the wrong cards, and therefore you're in a good position. You can draft white no problem because they will not pick the cards that you're most interested in. Another card, Plundering Pirate. That one has around 27% wheel rate. Solid card in multiple archetypes, makes an artifact, is a pirate, ramps your dinosaurs, so that can be playable also there, and stops the ground offensive quite well. So you want to have it in your deck. You obviously don't want to first pick it, but again, if you have a red card or if you have a dino in the first pack that you are willing to take, you should take into account that you have a good 30% chance of winning the Plundering Pirate. And another one is Armored Kincaller. This one wheels 35% of the time. And again, if you have a good uncommon dinosaur and another good uncommon in a different color, you might want to gamble on the other good dinosaur and wheel the Kincaller and again get the double whammy of having a cheap dinosaur. Now, 35% of the time it will wheel, which is not a guarantee. And obviously you you should think about the quality of the pack. If it's really poor and this is the only really good card in there, maybe it will not wheel. But if there are a couple of good white, red, blue cards, you can just hope that it comes back to you. And again, good information if it doesn't, especially if you're trying to be in the dinosaur deck. You know that there is a second dinosaur drafter on the table, most likely. Then there are the 50%, what I call the coin flip wheel targets. And here we have our two amazing first picks in Inverted Iceberg and Goblin Tomb Rider. This is probably one of the reasons why this deck was so good, because both of those cards are particularly strong and they still wheel 50% of the time. People don't draft them high enough, so is overly open and people were abusing that strategy. That's why we saw this weird data that is hard to explain in a different way. And we also see Atali's Favor, which wheels like 55% of the time. I think that this card is slightly overrated. In a way, it's not a bad card. It's still quite good. But part of its win rate is because it was disproportionately played by high win rate players. So actually, I think if we would force 100 people of different ability to play with it, the win rate of the card would be lower than it is right now. So I think that this one has artificially elevated win rate. It's something that happened in some sets ago. I think it was in the Dungeons and Dragons set when NCAA, one of the prolific streamers and well-known forcers of aggro decks, played. It was Iron Golem, I think, like a 5/3 vigilance with has to attack every turn if possible. And it had a very high win rate in the first days, but it turns out that this high win rate was exclusively elevated by one player forcing the card and having good result, because that particular player can win with almost anything. So one player can make a difference in the data when there are small numbers. And here, I think, because Atali's Favor got the hype, lots of invested players overplayed it and got good results with it because they are good players and because they were forcing, Izzet and Boros, and getting really amazing results with Atali's Favor. Like, for example, it had actually quite a low win rate in dinosaur decks. And that's probably because, it will never find anything useful in dinosaur deck unless you hit the Kin Collar or something. But most of the time you play Atali's Favor and you get like a frog or combat trick or something. Okay. And then we have the sure wheel targets. And that's around 70% chance of wheeling. I mean, it's as good as you can actually count on it. And here we have two important cards: Cogwork Wrestler, also known as Pogwork Wrestler, 1 mana, 1/2, flash, gives -2/-0 until end of turn to a target creature and opponent controls. Instant artifact trigger, lots of things that can be done with it. Wins every combat somehow. Makes attacking with your 2/2 double striker a nightmare, because you have to think very hard if you do that into open 1 blue mana, which you always have because there's always the Siren looming there with the 1 blue mana open for some reason. It doesn't give colorless. And it wheels 70% of the time. So this is the kind of a card that you can first pick something strong and in blue or white or red and hope for the Cogwork Wrestler to wheel. You pick Captain Storm first pick, no problem. Cogwork Wrestler will wheel. That's exactly the card you want to do. 70% of the time it will happen. And if it doesn't, then you definitely know that someone in the pod is in the know and is in your colors, so, which is also a useful piece of information for you. Another card, the Construction Hammer. This is as Cogwork Wrestler is to artifact synergy decks, the Construction Hammer is the best friend of the 1/1 flyers in this format. And this also wheels 70% of the time. So you don't need to prioritize it. You can get it late. And just checking where I'm lost. Deconstruction Hammer. It actually has a much higher win rate when you pick it late. So you don't want to pick it. You don't want to pick it earlier than, pack 1, pick 8 for the best results. That's when it has like higher win rate. If you pick it the second half of the pack, it has the win rate of around 57%. If you pick it earlier, it can go down to like 54, 55. So you don't want to pick it overly early, because you'd rather have other good cards then and hope that the Construction Hammers will come to you later in the draft. So yeah, this is the sort of selection of the cards that are wheeling, but good part of this analysis is that you can do a bunch of it yourself. You can just go to this graph, and again, you can go to the YouTube video, pause it on the graph. If you really want to have better access to it, again, as a patron, you get access to the slides, so you can just click on the slides and copy the graph and use it at your leisure. If you want a generic one, there is an MTGA Zone article that I made on wheeling that has this sort of generic curve. It might be slightly off compared to this one by 2% here and there, but it should be still okay. And now we can go to the second part of the seminar, the drafting the right way. And obviously, drafting the right way is a play on drafting the hard way from Ben Stark. And it's not a play, really, because it is an important addition to it, I guess. Drafting the hard way is a theory article from years ago. I don't know the sets that Ben is writing about. It's Gate Crash or something. Ages ago, on how to draft according to Ben Stark. And it's been an extremely influential piece of limited content, if possibly together with Frank Karsten's mana-based building article. This is probably the thing, and maybe like some all-time episodes of Limited Resources with like explaining what bread is and stuff like that. This is probably one of the most seminal pieces of limited content that you will ever find. And the basic idea behind it is that in a draft, in the old sets, you'll be rewarded by finding the right lane. Because if you find the right lane, sacrificing some picks in order to find an open lane is worth it, because you will be rewarded by finding that lane. And as I said, it's one of the most important pieces of limited content that's ever been written. But I think the design of the sets changed a bit. That's not to say that drafting the hard way is not the good strategy, but I think that it is at its extremes detrimental to the win rates of the players. Because by weaving and trying to find the lane, you will often miss out on situations when something is just open and you just go into it and you crash it and you pick everything that is put in your way that is fitting to that particular color. Basically forcing it, or at least drafting with preferences, because that's the second concept. That's drafting with preferences. And here I have an excerpt of Kyle Rose, Ham TV, explaining the topic. I'm just going to read it out for the podcast people. Like, hello, I have a lot of thoughts on the subject. Shut up, dog. This may not come out perfect, but I'll try to go over some stuff. I will not try to justify this draft or any picks or anything like it. In my theory that there is the best deck and I try to force it, sometimes I will fail. This in theory will be more than made up Magic Online until about 2 weeks ago, when the queues started to slow down. Drafting there is totally different than drafting on Arena. Decks on Arena are way better since the draft tables are filled with novices. This leads to a few more reasons to try to draft the best archetype. One of these is that good cards of all archetypes get passed around more than they should on Arena, and in general you will wind up with a playable deck of anything you set your mind to draft. Also, signals are extremely unreliable on Arena, especially in early packs. Giving up your first 2 or 3 picks because you think you're getting a different signal is devastating when people are basically picking the cards based on the artwork, rarity, or whatever else they decide at the time. If you see something 8, 9, 10 pick, this is a much more likely to be an actual signal, but it's also likely to be too late. And this is perfect description of what I'm thinking about. So Ham is basically saying that there are good color pairs. And on Arena especially, you will be able to get onto those color pairs a lot of the time. And even if you don't, you will lose some drafts. There will be train wreck. Doesn't matter. The amount you win by forcing a good color pair is just going to overtake it. And of course, Ham is a genius drafter, which means that he can sort of do that kind of thing. I wouldn't recommend forcing to beginners, because that leads to overforcing, and overforcing will also hurt you. And this is not only the concept of Ham. There was Ryan Sachs's article, and he had a very good, I think, episode number 26 of Lords of Limited. Absolutely worth re-listening to that. It's maximizing for your own preferences and drafting with preferences, as opposed to drafting the hard way. And this shows that drafting the hard way, as explained by Ben Stark, and I know that there are subtleties and been explained and added to that theory quite a lot of times, but drafting the hard ways, as is understood by people very frequently, means that you should be open to any color combination. And this is a problem because then you run into the trouble when you have better or worse color pairs in a particular format. You will end up being likely to end up in those weaker color pairs. Why? Because they will be more open. And because they're more open, you are going to start drafting them because you draft the hard way, which means that you look for the open path, and more often than not, the weak path is going to be the one that's open. And that's where the moment when drafting with preferences comes in, and you say, look, I am drafting sort of the hard way, but I do have my preferences. In this format, it will be perfect to explain. I am planning to be on is it, and that's going to be my starting preference. I'm going to be likely to pick a blue, red, or white card in my first pick. And then if I see that this is cut, then I might weave to another path because I see that there is no chance of me getting a decent is it deck. But my first choice is going to be is it. Therefore, I'm going to assign a higher weight to those is it cards than to equal quality even cards in different color combinations. And yeah, again, I would highly recommend reading this article and listening to the podcast that Ryan did with Lords Limited. It's great content and a great food for thought. And same reading the Drafting the Hard Way article by Ben Stark and listening to, he did a couple of podcasts on that as well. Very important to get the basic kind of theory on that. So basically my idea here comes in, and that was that there must be a right mixture of preferences and flexibility. And to use the extreme examples, if you always force, you will, if you force the right thing, because of course there can be a disaster strategy of always forcing the very bad deck, and then you're both losing and also ending with a train wreck version of a bad deck, which is a double train wreck, I guess. But if you always force, you will frequently end up with a train wreck. And you also are going to trophy quite a lot, because if it's open, you just get into the strongest archetype, you forced it, you're open path, or at least modestly open, you're going to get a great deck. Then there is another extreme example: you always weave till very late. This means that you probably will end up most of the time with a decent deck, because you will in the end find that open lane. But at the same time, you will frequently miss on the opportunity of something being open from first pick, because you pick the first pick, strongest card, second pick, strongest card. Not a big chance that it's going to be in the same color. Third pick, strongest card, very unlikely that it's going to be coherent. Fourth, fifth pick, so you're going to end up like at least cards of 3-4 colors until pick 7 or something. Then you can start picking your color. So if you always weave, you might miss out on something because you sacrifice those early picks, where you could have had close power card in the color that you started with. But of course, the problem with my idea is that it's simple, but how do I figure out what is the right amount of having preference and the right amount of having flexibility? Right. Now, I told you that I was always curious about one particular. I told you in the beginning, in the preamble, that I was always having this idea that there is something about trophy rate that bothers me, and it bothered me very strongly for many, many months. And I always was thinking about it. I actually had it lined up. And what bothered me is that people that have same win rates have sometimes very different trophy rates. And I was thinking about it, like, why would it be so? And what would the reason for that be? And how to maybe communicate it better? Because I had a good feeling of what it might be. I even contacted a couple of players that had biggest disproportion between the win rates and trophy rates that they had. So they had the same win rate, but they had very different trophy rates. And I tried maybe to look at their personal data and come from there, but it never worked out. So so I abandoned the idea, but I still was continuously obsessed by the difference, because obviously it means that people that have high trophy rates, they have a lot of 7-0s and a lot of 0-3s. And people that have low trophy rates, they win a lot, but they never go past that 5-3, 6-3, and they have lots of those 5-3, 6-3s, but they never have like 7 X's. And then variance, of course, will explain something. But when we're looking at the very large data sets, and large data sets, its all-time leaderboard, for example, is a perfect data set for that. Those differences should be quite minimal. And we still see them. So there is clearly something there that is actual signal, not only noise. So I had this eureka moment, and I was talking about it in the preamble, of course. I was looking at the Pasta Pirate data. And when I agreed, when I invited the Pasta Pirate to be my guest last year to look at his personal data, I calculated that he trophies more than the win rate would suggest. Because I was curious about, I saw that he's got lots of trophy decks, and of course he plays a lot. But I also sort of looked at people with similar win rates, and they all had lower win rate, trophy rate than he did. And then my hypothesis was that I think that he just forces a lot, because that would explain it. And then it sort of came back to me like, oh yeah, he forces a lot. He's got a high trophy rate compared to his win rate. Therefore, if I look at the whole data set, if I confirm my hypothesis, first of all, that he forces a lot, and then I can actually look at the leaderboard data and compare it with other people, I can actually start working on something. And well, first graph, this is the number of games that Pasta Pirate played with different color combinations in Wilds of Eldraine. And I think that sort of confirms that he does force a lot. Looking at the graph, he has 946 games with Rakdos decks, and the second most played archetype he played was Selesnya with 105 games. So massive forcing. I think all the other archetypes have fewer games than just Rakdos. So over 50%, probably over 60-70% of the games were played in Rakdos decks. So yeah, definitely, and he admitted this as much. He always started the draft knowing that he's going to be in Rakdos, and most of the time he was, except for some extreme cases. Wouldn't be surprised if most of the other things are stipulation drafts or something. So there goes my first hypothesis of the first confirmation of the hypothesis that indeed my feeling that he will have a higher trophy rate because he forced a lot is correct. And then I just plotted all the win rates and trophy rates of the top 500 all-time leaderboard on 17 lens. And there is this beautiful trend line for where should you be. And here comes the idea that every dot below that line means that players who are in question, those dots represent people. Let's remember about it. These players probably durdle too much. They draft too hard. They weave too much. They don't. They sometimes should force more. And all the players that are above the line are the players that force a lot, and they have more trophies. But if they played maybe a bit more flexibly, their win rate should go up. And this is the idea. This is where the usefulness of this idea comes. If you do that for your own data, and if you compare yourself to that curve and you see where you end up, and you find that you are actually below the curve, very likely you should be drafting a bit more with preferences and find a bit more of the preference. Like, for instance, this dot here, for the people in the know, this is Greg Hatch. Very high trophy rate compared to his win rate, which is also a very high win rate. I mean, we're talking about a player with 65% win rate, but it seems to me he's the type of a player that forces quite a lot. It would be nice to get a personal recognition of that fact and admission of his own forcing behavior. And everyone can plot it. It's available in the leaderboard data, so there is no hiding now. Now that the cat is out of the bag. And probably these players here, I don't know who they are, but they look like they have a much lower trophy rate than their win rate would suggest. So at 57% win rate, you would expect to trophy like 17% of the time. They do 12% of the time. So there is an improvement possible there, in my opinion, if they would try to be more assertive in their drafting and try to have more preference. And I think that the effect of you changing your behavior would be dramatic in terms of trophy, and also positive in terms of win rate. So my hypothesis is, and this is something that I cannot confirm yet, but if these two players would change their drafting patterns and give themselves a bit more, train themselves more to be more forcing the better card combinations, and durdle a bit less during the draft, I think that their draft win trophy rate would go up to where it should be, so around 17%. But also at the same time, their win rate would slightly increase. So they should end up not here at 57, but maybe at 59, and then go to around 20% win rate. So this is the kind of improvement I'm foreseeing for people who will adjust their behavior. And we're talking about extreme cases here. But if you're just slightly below that line, you should still improve your trophy rate by like 2-3%, and maybe your win rate by 1% or something. So I think there are rewards in analyzing yourself from that aspect. So I think that a good homework for people who are in this seminar would be to go to your 17 lands data, check your all-time win rate, all-time trophy rate, plot it against this curve. I'm going to write it up for mtgzone.com. So there will be an article. You can just click it and you will have this curve there, but you can also plot it yourself if you really want to. Try to find yourself, and then try to figure it out. Is durdling necessary to shift the meta and try new combinations of cards? I think that you don't need to durdle to find new combinations of cards. I think by durdling, I mean picking cards you know you're not going to be playing. By durdling, I mean it's pack 1, pick 8, and you're still like having 4 colors open, and you don't know which path is open, and you're trying to find your path. This is what I mean by durdling. I mean durdling in draft, not durdling in the gameplay. You can draft a durdly deck that durdles during the game. That's a different story altogether. I'm talking about durdling during your picks. I can make also the curve for best of 3 players, Rosemary. Good suggestion. I will put it also in the article so you can use it for yourself. So yeah, I guess that people who are on the under the curve would be benefited from maybe fixing how you draft a bit early, and having stronger preferences. So yeah, if you trophy more than win rate suggests, you probably force too much. If you trophy less than win rate suggests, you probably durdle too much in the draft, not in the game. That's important to distinguish. There are, I think, alternative possibilities that are somewhat linked. High win rate and low trophy rate can have other explanations, at least. I didn't find a good explanation for trophy rate that is way higher than you would expect than forcing too much. One explanation is that you are a good Magic player, but you need to improve your draft skills. That doesn't necessarily mean that you durdle, but it means that maybe you have wrong pick order. For example, you find the lanes right, but you just don't get good cards because you pick the bad cards and put them in your deck. This is frequently for some players that move from constructed towards limited. It's about normal. I think that those things are easy to learn away as a bad habit. And the second option is that you are drafting the wrong colors. And that would mean that you might have preferences, but they're wrong preferences. For example, you, for some weird reason, want to draft Golgari all the time in this format. You're just going to have lower trophy rate, even if you are drafting perfectly and perfectly open, because your preference is just assigned to a wrong color. So you're drafting the right mixture of preference and hard way, but your preferences are wrong. So yeah, that's another explanation that I can find for that. Okay. Yeah, and here we have actionable advice and homeworks, the new section of my seminar. I think if you are more of a durdling or forcing drafter, this is a good exercise to do before you check your numbers. Think where you find yourself. Then, once you have that thought, explore your all-time win rate and trophy rate, and then you can check if you're above or below the trend line. Again, you can go back to the seminar when it's on YouTube or on Twitch or when the article is coming out, and then see if it matches your expectations. If it matches your expectations, um, that's good, because at least you know what's wrong, and now you also have numbers to show that what's wrong, and you have potential targets for your self-improvement. As I said, if you are going to fix it in some way, over a long time, your trophy rate is going to go up, but also your win rate should go slightly up if you adjust it. So yeah, this is the homework part, and I think with that we can end the seminar. Obviously, thanks to the 17 Lands team, nothing would be possible without them. Again, we're super grateful to have this data. I'd like to thank Fake Jake Brown also for the eternal support that he gives to me, releasing it in the podcast version. And I'm not the only one person that owes a lot of gratitude to Fake Jake for all the help that he's doing to the community. I would like to thank Esesco and Mana Junkie for the music that we're using in the podcast. And thanks to my patrons, especially Brian Damien, who is the new one for this week, but and next week it might be you. Also, this is something that is pretty new. I also have a Discord now, also with the zone for the patrons, but also for everyone else. So I'm going to put links in the description for you to join if you are interested in talking about data or seeing my attempts of making a quiche and my cat's attempts of making my life miserable. All of those things will be available in that zone. And with that, I'll see you next week when we have a surprise guest and a non-surprise topic. You can figure it out if you know anything about the calendar of magic. See you then.